Hi, I'm Hal Roberts. This is Bridge City News. Here's some of the top stories we've been following. We have details as to how many hostages have been released by Hamas and which countries they are from. We chat with Lethbridge Conservative MP Rachel Thomas, who continues to blast the Trudeau Liberals over the federal carbon tax and the high cost of living in Canada. And after hearing concerns from many Albertans, the province has decided to shut down a number of photo radar locations.
Your nation, your province, your southern Alberta. From the heart of Lethbridge, it's Bridge City News with Hal Roberts.
Thanks so much for joining us. The Israeli military says the hostages released by the terrorist group Hamas have returned to Israel. Their arrival comes after Qatar's foreign ministry confirmed the release of 24 hostages, including 13 Israeli citizens, 10 Thai citizens, and a person from the Philippines. Around 200 still remain captive. Women and children are undergoing medical checks and are being taken to Israeli hospitals while they're being reunited with their families. Israel, meanwhile, released 39 Palestinian prisoners. The hostage release comes as a 4-day ceasefire has begun to facilitate the exchange of Israeli hostages for Palestinian prisoners and as trucks full of humanitarian aid arrive in Gaza. TBN Israel's correspondent Yair Pinto, who is also on active duty with Israeli Defense Forces, says the deal is actually to release more than 50 Israeli hostages in return for a much higher number of Palestinian prisoners.
There is a deal that has been orchestrated behind the scenes to release 53 Israeli hostages in exchange for some 150 Palestinian prisoners. On top of this deal, the IDF will grant Hamas 4 days of ceasefire in the Gaza Strip. This is a good time to remind all of you that Hamas kidnapped more than 40 Israeli children on the 7th of October, and these children are still being held somewhere inside the Gaza Strip. Some of them are separated from their parents, and some of them are hostages together, while others lost their parents on the 7th of October in the Hamas massacre against Israeli civilians.
Meanwhile, Palestinian refugees struggle in an overcrowded UN shelter in southern Gaza. They were forced to evacuate their homes in the northern part of Gaza once the Israeli military launched their offensive against Hamas following the October 7th attacks.
حتى الأولاد هاي أطفال برضو خايفين. بقولك يا بيحكوا لأبوهم يا بابا شردنا من قصف اجينا لقصف. يعني بالمرة ما فيش أمان، أقول لك فيش أمان بالمرة. يعني برضو هنا في المواسم قلنا بأمان ما فيش أمان. لسه القصف شغال علينا.
Wow. Federal Conservative leader Pierre Poilievre told reporters that the United Kingdom says Canada is likely a hotspot right now for a terrorist attack. The federal government, meanwhile, says our country is only at a medium risk.
Well, the Prime Minister said the other day that there has been a terrorist attack on our people. There was a terrorist attack there are multiple terrorist attacks against synagogues and schools in Montreal, according to the Prime Minister, while he says the risk level is only medium. We also have terrorist attacks that happened against innocent Muslims in Quebec City and in London, Ontario, and we've had churches burned down. We need to have a review of Canada's assessment of the risk of an attack in this country.
Well, we enjoyed lots of sunshine again today, but slightly cooler than our average high for this time of year, which is around 2 degrees in southwestern Alberta. Jeanette Rocher is in now with an early look at the forecast. Jeanette, the mercury should be going up as we head into the weekend?
That's right, and the sunshine should remain as well. So all in all, not a bad couple of days ahead of us. Into this evening, a few clouds, looking at an overnight low of -9. And then as we get into tomorrow, Saturday, mainly sunny skies. Could see a few clouds there by the afternoon and high of 3 degrees with a 20 wind. After that, it's going to warm up even more. And for this time of year, I'll tell you what, I'm going to take it. I'll be back later in the show to give you that 7-day forecast.
Thanks so much, Jeanette. Former Conservative leader and Regina MP Andrew Scheer says the Trudeau government really needs to get their spending under control. Scheer says the more the Liberals spend, the more it's actually hurting Canadians.
The Prime Prime Minister's mini budget was full of bad news for Canadians. Rent up, taxes up, prices up, and interest rates up to fight the inflation his deficits cause. In fact, Scotiabank said that their mortgage rates would be 2 full percentage points lower if the government could just control its spending. That would be the difference for hundreds of thousands of Canadians between losing their home and being able to renew their mortgage. So, does the government realize that time is running out, and will they end their deficit spending so that Canadians can keep their homes?
The leader of the official opposition and his MPs are simply not worth the risk. He and his MPs voted against the Canada-Ukraine free trade deal. Why, Mr. Speaker? They made a brutal political calculation that they would have more support from their far-right base here in Canada and in Russia and their friends in the United States than if they would abandon Ukrainians. Cold, calculated, cruel. Behold, Mr. Speaker, the new Conservative Party and their MPs. What a disgrace.
What's disgraceful and cruel is using Ukraine's vulnerability while Russian tanks are on its soil to shove a carbon tax permanently down their throat. And don't be fooled by their phony outrage. They are desperate to talk about anything except for their terrible budget. That's because not only are workers' paychecks going to pay higher prices and interest rates, but now their tax dollars are going to pay higher interest payments on the national debt. In fact, next year, the government will spend more on that national debt than on healthcare and the armed forces. When will the government stop their deficits so we can pay doctors and nurses and soldiers instead of bankers and bondholders?
You know, as Canadians continue to struggle with the high cost of living, Lethbridge Tory MP Rachel Thomas says the Trudeau government really needs to get rid of the carbon tax altogether, which is causing food prices to skyrocket. She says food inflation is also causing more people to visit local food banks.
Here in Lethbridge, our numbers have increased drastically at food banks. They've nearly doubled in the last few years. And I think what's alarming about that is it's folks who are working full time. It's folks who, traditionally would have a fairly stable income and the ability to meet their daily necessities. But unfortunately, due to, economic struggle and just where we're at as a nation right now, due to, Prime Minister Trudeau's decisions, unfortunately, many Canadians are just not able to do that right now. And so they're having to resort to using a food bank on a regular basis.
Lethbridge MP Rachel Thomas will also discuss how the Trudeau government has failed in reaching their emissions targets, even with the federal carbon tax. She'll have details coming up after business news. Many farmers are in support of the Conservatives' private members' bill C-234. It says Ottawa should exempt the carbon tax on natural gas and propane that farmers use for commercial purposes, farmers who put food on our tables. Ken Coles is the Executive Director of Farming Smarter here in Lethbridge, and he says climate change is really what's influencing a lot of government policy right now.
Climate change efforts are sort of top of mind in many governments, and lots of sort of political will and agenda towards that, and that influences everything, even including food production. So on the side challenge to that is that we're seeing this really tremendous inflation run right now. So everything is super expensive, cost of food. So now we've almost got these competing priorities. How do we get inflation and cost of living down, and at the same time, innovate and be good in the agricultural sector?
Make sure you catch the full interview with Ken Coles from Farming Smarter and BCN's Naveen Day coming up later in our broadcast. After hearing from thousands of Albertans about their frustrations with photo radar, the province has decided to ban the devices on ring roads at both Calgary and Edmonton beginning December 1st. Calgary has 8 ring road photo radar sites, while Edmonton has 22. Transport Minister Devin Dreeshen says he will be meeting with municipalities and law enforcement over the next year on removing all fishing hole locations around Alberta. He says moving forward, photo radar will only be used to improve traffic safety and not to be used as a cash grab.
This single site here at Ray Gibbons Drive is one of these fishing holes in particular. So when you look behind me, there's about 1,500 tickets that get issued here on a quarterly basis, about every 3 months, that generate about $200,000 worth of revenue. So in about 1 year here just outside of Edmonton, they'll have $1 million worth of photo radar tickets. Now, that's about 11 times the average site compared in the city of Edmonton. And there are other fishing holes along the Edmonton and Calgary ring roads, so on Stony Trail and Anthony Henday. Now, these sites are focused on revenue generation rather than traffic safety, and so let me be perfectly clear, this will end here in the province of Alberta.
Now, in total, photo radar generated $171 million in Alberta in 2022 to 2023. 60% of the traffic fine revenue goes to the municipalities, while 40% goes to the province. Crowsnest RCMP say a pedestrian was killed late Thursday afternoon when she was struck by a vehicle on Highway 3 at Range Road 31 near Burmis. Police say they received a call just before 6 p.m. yesterday. Police and EMS attended the scene shortly after receiving the call, but sadly, the 37-year-old Blairmore woman died at the scene. The driver of the vehicle was uninjured. Police say the investigation into the collision will continue, and they say alcohol was not a factor. A legendary bridge in Winnipeg has been shut down. The 111-year-old Arlington Bridge has been closed indefinitely due to structural concerns. The decision was made after an engineering assessment found excessive corrosion in the steel truss bridge, getting to the point where annual safety repairs were no longer viable. Officials at the City of Winnipeg's Public Works Department say the bridge is becoming more and more dangerous, so Winnipeggers will have to find an alternative route. The Arlington Bridge was built over the CPR Winnipeg yards in 1911. City officials were first told that the bridge was approaching the end of its life way back in 1967. Plans to replace it have been put off in favor of repairs ever since. It appears as though fraud is on the rise here in our country. According to Statistics Canada, fraud against Canadians topped $16 billion over the past 5 years. The agency says in 2019, 1 in 6 people reported that they've been a victim of fraud over the past 5 years. The average loss was $600. Around 25% of victims say they lost $1,000, while around 3% said they lost at least $10,000. Just over 5 million people aged 15 and older reported being a victim of fraud. Stats Canada says Alberta had the highest proportion of people being scammed at 22%. The lowest, Nunavut at 8.6%. New Brunswick and Newfoundland and Labrador came in at 13%. The folks at Tourism Lethbridge picked up some nice hardware recently. The group won the 2023 Culinary Tourism Experience Award from the Tourism Association of Canada. Aaron Crane is the CEO of Tourism Lethbridge, who joins us now right here from the Windy City. Aaron, how much of an honor was this for your group?
It was huge, right? Being nominated for the award was the first step. Becoming a finalist, one of the top 3 all across Canada was amazing. And sitting at the table that night with all of the other nominees was humbling. There are some great people doing great work in this space. So I was honestly shocked and in awe to win.
So what did the judges base their criteria on?
Some of the things that they were looking for were, the marketing of the category. So how much work had you done to really elevate the culinary tourism, work being done? And then also capacity building. What is this in helping everyone else in your community to participate? And I think that's one of the areas, where that probably put us a little bit more ahead of the others. We've done a lot of work with the local businesses. We're actually hosting strategy workshop on Tuesday, the 28th, with our partners at Food Tourism Strategies to continue this work. And during the winter is a perfect time to do it because, everyone slows down a little bit, and then we can start planning and gearing up for what it's going to look like, in May, June, July, and August, when we start welcoming more and more people into our community and getting, our retailers and our farmers and everyone opening up their doors.
Aaron Crane, CEO of Tourism Lethbridge, congratulations again on the award, and thanks so much for your time today. The first ever Glow Lethbridge officially opened its doors on Thursday. Now this means you'll be able to take part in a festive light display at the Agri-Food Hub and Trade Center during the Christmas holiday season. It's an indoor display featuring over 1 million lights. The theme is called Glow Around the World, which features 6 different nations. It's designed to give the viewers a feel of how each country celebrates the holiday season. CEO for Lethbridge and District Exhibition, Mike Workington, says admission into the venue includes more than just an amazing light show.
Free pictures with Santa, with admission to the show. We do have some other very special guests joining us. We do have musical acts performing most of the nights here. We have some community choirs. We have some up-and-coming, budding local musicians that are going to hit our stage and really kind of spread that holiday joy around here.
By the way, Workington says the display took crews more than 160 hours over 10 days to set up. Wow. Glow around the world. I love it. We've been loving some of the weather as well here in southwestern Alberta. Not too cold, and a nice weekend is also shaping up. All of the weather details coming up shortly. You know, thanks to the slightly warmer temperatures, the dusting of the light snow we received here in Lethbridge has basically disappeared. Jeanette Rocher is now with all of the weather details. Jeanette, the weekend is shaping up quite nicely if someone is considering maybe a hike through the coulees or a walk down by the Old Man River here in Lethbridge.
Yeah, considering it's going to be very sunny and not so windy either. And we are seeing temperatures that are higher than seasonable. So seasonable right now is 2 degrees. We're getting up higher than that for most of this week, and mainly clear skies as well. 3 for a high on Saturday, up to 5 on Sunday, all the way up to 6 on Monday, climbing even higher into Tuesday, a high of 8 degrees. And then we're going to dip down a little bit to 3 degrees on Wednesday, and then round out that 7-day forecast with a high of 0 on Thursday with partly cloudy skies. So seasonable is 2 degrees, as I mentioned. -9 is the average low. 17 was our high temperature on this day back in 1939. And we had the chilliest one on record, which was -28 for this day that happened back in 1996. Sun rose this morning at 7:57, and 4:39 is when the sun will be going down, giving us 3 minutes less light than we had yesterday, 8 hours and 42 minutes of daylight. Mainly a sunny one on the west coast tomorrow. On the island there, Victoria looking at a high of 8 degrees, 7 degrees in Vancouver, that lower mainland there. Into Edmonton, we're looking at a 30% chance of flurries, 4 degrees for a high, 6 for a high in Calgary with a mix of sun and cloud. Both of those cities also seeing a 20 to 40K wind. 30K wind expected in Saskatoon tomorrow. Also a 30% chance of flurries, 1 degree the expected high, -1 expected in Regina tomorrow. Starting out sunny, going to see some periods of snow as we get into the afternoon there. -1 is the expected high tomorrow in Winnipeg. Winnipeg looking at a mix of sun and cloud. As we get into the central part of the country, mainly clear skies in Toronto, 3 degrees the high there, 1 for a high in Ottawa, and Montreal is the only minus there, sitting at -2 tomorrow, but clear skies. As we get into the Atlantic part of the country there, the Maritimes, clear skies in Fredericton, high of -5, 30% chance of flurries in the morning. In Halifax, -3 for a high, -4 in Charlottetown, also looking at a 30% chance of flurries. Now in St. John, here's what's happening. We are seeing that high of 2 degrees, but going to be quite a bit of precipitation, looking at 2 to 5 centimeters of snow in St. John. Could see some rain as well along the coast there. And also the Avalon and Burn Peninsula is looking at 3 to 7 centimeters of snow as we are seeing that special weather statement in effect there. So there you have it. That is your forecast.
Rogers Sugar has applied to the BC Labour Relations Board for mediation to help it reach a new collective agreement. Workers at the Vancouver refinery have been on strike for 8 weeks now. The company says the union has accepted mediation. The refinery on the West Coast is one of only 3 large sugar refineries in the country that processes imported cane sugar. The strike has led to supply disruptions on grocery store shelves across Western Canada. International Trade Minister Mary Ng says Canada received a big win in its ongoing dairy dispute with the United States. A settlement panel rejected complaints from the U.S. Trade Representative's office over how Canada is allocating its dairy import quotas. It is the second dispute resolution panel in 3 years to explore U.S. complaints that Canada is unfairly favoring processors over producers. The findings of the first one had largely been in favor of the United States. Retail sales rose 0.6% to $66.5 billion in September. Stats Canada says sales at motor vehicle and parts dealers rose 1.5%, led by a 2.4% gain in sales at new car dealers. Sales at food and beverage retailers, however, fell 0.4%. Meanwhile, the agency's early estimates suggest that retail sales went up 0.8% in October, but that figure could change. Today is Black Friday. Now, this year's annual shopping bonanza of discounts, door crashers, and sales are especially welcomed by Canadians who are pretty stressed out about high inflation and interest rates.
Just doing some quick Black Friday shopping, trying to beat the rush, so I came in quite a bit early. I came in right at 7. Just did a little bit of family and friend shopping. Got some deals for my phone as well, so it kind of worked out already this morning. So I feel like I've already got a whole list of my shopping done. I would say just the phones, they have pretty good deals right now, and a little bit of the clothing stores, like Old Navy as they usually have, but I still have yet to browse more for more stores.
So I am obviously here for the Black Friday sale. I have taken a day off from the work just to buy the things and check out the sale. So the first shop that I came in was Apple, and we just got the Apple iPad. Yeah.
Now, here's a look at today's markets. The TSX was down 13 points on the day to finish at 20,103. The Dow was up 117 points to 35,390. The S&P 500 was up just under 3 today to 4559, and the Nasdaq was down 15 points to 14,250. West Texas Intermediate Oil was down $1.56 to 75.54 US per barrel. Natural gas was down 4 cents to 2.86 US. Gold was up $8.58 on the day to $2,000.82 US an ounce, and silver was up 65 cents to 24.33 US an ounce. Feed wheat is at $8.98 per bushel, barley's at $6.88, canola's at $15.71, and corn is at $8.25 per bushel. Live cattle December contract was down $4.23 to $170.25. Feeder cattle were down 74 cents to $228.64, and lean hogs December contract was down 70 cents to $67.58. The Canadian dollar was up slightly over the past 24 hours to 73.33 US. Recapping one of our top stories, the Israeli military says the hostages released by the terrorist group Hamas have returned to Israel. Their arrival comes after Qatar's foreign ministry confirmed the release of 24 hostages, including 13 Israeli citizens, 10 Thai citizens, and a person from the Philippines. Women and children are undergoing medical checks and are being taken to Israeli hospitals while being reunited with their families. The carbon tax is not only hurting homeowners here in Canada, but also our farmers and truckers, those who help put food on our tables. That's according to Lethbridge Conservative MP Rachel Thomas, who shares her concerns about the tax with us in just a moment. When you see news happening in your community, be sure to drop us an email at info@bridgecitynews.ca. And if you missed any of today's local stories, visit our website, bridgecitynews.ca.
Here's today's Bridge City News Community Calendar. Lethbridge Shakespeare Performance Society is sprinkling some holiday magic with a Christmas classic of Shakespearean proportions. On Thursday, December 14th, beginning at 7 p.m. at Casa, Charles Dickens and William Shakespeare take center stage with a theatrical reading of A Christmas Carol, along with singing of your favorite holiday songs. Get into the Christmas spirit and purchase your tickets for this holiday event at Casa. For details, visit the Lethbridge Shakespeare Performance Society's Facebook page. The annual Canadian Tire Teddy Bear and Toque Toss is taking place Friday, December 1st at the home game between the Lethbridge Hurricanes and the Saskatoon Blades. Fans are encouraged to bring a new stuffed animal or a warm toque for a child in need, and when the Hurricanes score their first goal of the night, fans can let the fur fly. Tickets for the Teddy Bear and Toque Toss are available at both Canadian Tire locations in Lethbridge, and with a purchase of a bear or toque for $15, fans will receive a free ticket to the game while quantities last. And that's today's Bridge City News Community Calendar.
New polls suggest that the Trudeau Liberals are plummeting in popularity. The recent numbers show that the Pierre Poilievre Conservatives in the lead with around 41% support, followed by the Liberals a distant second with just 22% and the NDP at 20%. They're almost neck and neck. Many attribute the recent 11-point drop by the Liberals to their carbon tax. Now, to chat about this tax in more detail is Lethbridge Conservative MP and Shadow Minister for Canadian Heritage, Rachel Thomas, who joins us now from the Windy City. Rachel, welcome back to Bridge City News.
Hi, Hal. So nice to be with you. Thanks for having me.
You bet. Now, the Liberals, supported by the Bloc, voted against pausing the carbon tax on all forms of home heating. That didn't sit well with many of us here in the West who wanted the same break as Atlantic Canadians who were seeing a 3-year pause on the tax for their home heating oil.
Yeah, Hal, I think, what ended up happening was Trudeau saw that his numbers in Atlantic Canada were plummeting. And of course, in an effort to salvage his relationship with those out east, he determined that he would bring forward a carve out in terms of the carbon tax for those who heat their homes using oil. Now, we know that this is only 3% of Canadians. And so while it helps them for the next 3 years, it's definitely still a huge detriment to those who use natural gas, let's say, to heat their homes, which of course is the vast majority of Canadians. So unfortunately, 97% of Canadians are left out in the cold still, having to pay an astronomical carbon tax on top of their home heating bill. And of course, I'm hearing from local residents here in the community of Lethbridge who are saying this really is adding to the tremendous burden that they're facing with regards to affordability and being able to make ends meet. And so it's really sad, actually, that the Prime Minister is choosing to divide our country in this way by choosing one region over another, rather than doing something that would be in the benefit of all Canadians.
You know, it really is an affordability crisis. We're seeing our utility rates, the electricity providers. I mean, some of the bills I'm getting $200-300 a month. And then, of course, now that winter's going to be setting in, you're right, the natural gas, that's going to be going up by quite a bit with our consumption. Now, there was actually a debate on a carbon tax carve-out for our farmers. How did that go?
Yeah, for sure. So there was actually 2 debates, if you don't mind. So there was one where we actually asked for the carbon tax pause, the 3-year pause, to be applied to all forms of home heating. And unfortunately, the Bloc and the Liberals voted against that. And so that did not come to pass. And then we brought forward as Conservatives another initiative, which was to carve out the carbon tax from farmers. So, of course, these are the individuals who are working hard to feed Canadians, and they're needing to heat their barns and they're needing to run their equipment and dry their grain. And all of this comes with an additional carbon tax added to the fuel that they're using for this. And so we've brought forward a private member's bill to take the carbon tax off of the fuel that is used by farmers. It was successful in the House of Commons. It went to the Senate, and it was debated there. Witnesses were heard from, and of course, it was an overwhelming message of support for the carbon tax to be removed. However, senators were promptly instructed by Liberal ministers who, gave them phone calls and sent them emails and very much applied pressure to them. It was encouraged that senators would try to stall the process as much as possible. And so the senators have certainly followed that directive. And so as of last week, the bill kind of came to a halt. That said, next week, the senators are going to be faced with a really tough choice. And ultimately, they're going to have to decide, do they support our farmers and driving down food costs, or do they support Trudeau and wanting to drive up those costs by applying a punitive carbon tax? And the senators are going to have to make that decision. And of course, Canadians are very much wanting to make their voices heard. And so many of them are writing to senators or calling senators and asking them to vote in favor of this private member's bill that would remove the carbon tax. Because of course, at the end of the day, they know that this is going to result in lower food prices for all Canadians.
Because, right now, you're right, the food prices are going through the roof. The carbon tax impacting our farmers, our truckers, and we're seeing record numbers of Albertans and Canadians going to food banks.
Yeah, and that's overwhelming as well, just in terms of the concern that is caused there. Here in Lethbridge, our numbers have increased drastically at food banks. They've nearly doubled in the last few years. And I think what's alarming about that is it's folks who are working full time. It's folks who, traditionally would have a fairly stable income and the ability to meet their daily necessities. But unfortunately, due to, economic struggle and just where we're at as a nation right now, due to, Prime Minister Trudeau's decisions, unfortunately, many Canadians are just not able to do that right now. And so they're having to resort to using a food bank on a regular basis.
Now, a recent report shows that the Trudeau government has failed in nearly every single one of their emissions targets. So, Rachel, if that's the case, why continue with the carbon tax?
Yeah, it's a great question, and it's definitely one that is backed by common sense for sure. Unfortunately, I think Prime Minister Trudeau just doesn't operate in that realm of common sense thinking, and so for him, it's very much about pushing forward an ideology without results. And so the ideology, of course, is that we need to do what's best for the planet, and in his mind, a carbon tax is what's best. Even though, to your point, metrics have not been met. Those objectives that the government said that they were going to be able to achieve just have not been achieved at all. And so as a result, then you have Canadians who are paying more and more. And as you mentioned, this is having a dramatic impact on how they're living life, including the use of a food bank. We also know that 1 in 5 Canadians are missing meals in order to try to make ends meet. We know folks are not having access to the nutrition that they need to have access to, again, just because of affordability. And so removing the carbon tax would really make a huge difference in terms of what we pay for the fuel we put in our vehicles, or the heat that we use for our homes, or the groceries that we buy to put on our table. And so it's really sad. It's very unfortunate that Prime Minister Trudeau is not willing to let go of this ideological framework of his.
So, Rachel, the Liberals' Rural Economic Development Minister Hutchings says the Prairie should really elect more Liberals if they want their voices heard on carbon pricing. Well, we have 2, George Chahal in Calgary, Randy Boissonneau in Edmonton. I guess that's not enough?
Well, in my mind, it's too many, actually, Hal. But nevertheless, to your point, yes. So these 2 individuals are Liberal members of Parliament here in the province of Alberta. And yes, you're correct. The minister did say that if Canadians, if more people in Alberta, she said, want to have their voices heard, then they need to elect more Liberals. Well, here's these 2 Liberal MPs who totally ignored the voices of their constituents and instead voted to toe the party line. And I think, again, what's sad about this is that the daily reality of Canadians is not being taken into account, but rather, this false ideological framework is being followed. And, I'm hearing from people here in my riding, but across Canada, who just cannot continue in this way. They're having to make huge sacrifices for themselves, for their family, just to try to survive. But it's coming to a place of great desperation. So we really need the Liberals to hear Canadians and to do the common sense thing. And the common sense thing is to scrap the carbon tax.
Rachel, Bill C-11, or the Online Streaming Act, will be moving ahead. The federal government gave the CRTC its orders so the legislation will be implemented. So what does that really mean now for a lot of online content creators?
Yeah, I appreciate the question. As heritage critic, this is something that's near and dear to my heart, something that I follow quite closely. And so Bill C-11 ultimately gives the CRTC, the regulatory arm of the government, the ability to control what people can see, what they can say, what they can hear online. And so it will have a huge impact on our ability to use the internet as Canadians. It will impact what we're able to access through our streaming apps, whether that's Disney Plus or Netflix or Crave. It'll have an impact on what we're able to view through YouTube. It'll have an impact on our use of podcasts and the way that we access information there. And so really what we'll see is more and more information will be curated by the government and the way that they want Canadians to view things, rather than Canadians being in control of what they want to see.
That's very concerning as well, because us here at Bridge City News, our team, we have over 16,000 subscribers to our YouTube channel. Since Meta blocked a lot of the Canadian content on our Facebook page, where we had around 45,000 followers. So it's making it a lot harder for those of us in independent media to get the message out, get the truth out. Rachel, the Bank of Canada says we may not see 1 or 2% for an overnight rate for quite a while. In fact, we may even see another increase from the current 5% to help get inflation in check. Now, you speak with your constituents all of the time. How is this higher interest rate really impacting Albertans?
Yeah. So again, like the carbon tax, certainly when interest rates go up, it has a huge impact on people's ability to afford the necessities of life. And so, when interest rates go up, it impacts, the expense of our mortgages, it impacts our rent costs, it impacts food costs, it impacts everything really, because, things within our economy are so much backed by loans. And when the loan interest rate goes up, then of course, those that are selling those goods that were purchasing also have to increase the cost. And so that said, it is having a huge impact on those in Lethbridge. I'm speaking to people who bought a home, maybe 3, 4, 5 years ago at a rate of 2 or 3%, and now they're, maybe looking to remortgage in the next year, and they don't know how they're going to do it. They're feeling the crisis of having to pay, 1.5 to 2 times more for their mortgage. And at the end of the day, their paycheck hasn't gone up. And so it's a huge detriment to them. In addition to that, you have folks who are paying rental costs, and, with fewer and fewer, places to live that are available to folks, they're just kind of trapped. And their rental costs are, going up on them, but they don't have any other options. And so again, they're feeling at a place of detriment. I think it's important to note that really it didn't need to be this way. The reason we're at this place is because the government decided to spend an astronomical amount of money, and that's really what caused inflation to skyrocket. Which then, of course, when inflation skyrockets, the cost of everything goes up, and then the bank tries to respond by increasing interest rates in order to slow spending. At the end of the day, everybody gets hurt. And so I think that's really what we're seeing. We're seeing Canadians in crisis mode.
You're talking about mortgage rates, and I just came off a 4-year closed mortgage at 2.79, and I renewed for a 3-year closed at 5.05. Or no, 5.09. And right now that 3-year closed mortgage has jumped up to about 6.5%, 7%. So it's just unbelievable. You're right. A lot of people are finding it more difficult to make their mortgage payments, or maybe they'll have to downsize or even possibly rent again. Now, you recently posted on social media that our country's Heritage Minister, Pablo Rodriguez, gave $130,000 to Laith Marouf, a person who has a history of anti-Semitism. Ironically, he was given the funds to help with anti-racism training. Now, when you asked the minister about this at committee, what happened?
Yeah, we had the opportunity to ask the minister about this, a number of months ago. And when he was brought forward to committee and asked questions with regard to this incident, where $130,000 was given to Laith Marouf, the minister, claimed ignorance, that he wasn't aware. But we have documents now that have come to us in recent weeks that actually reveal that the minister did know, that emails were sent to him, that he was made aware. And so, to know that the minister misled committee is alarming in and of itself. But I think what's more alarming in this case is that you have an anti-Semite, and I mean a raging public anti-Semite. His entire social media accounts were plastered with the most vile posts one can imagine. And this individual was given over $130,000. These are taxpayer dollars. These are Canadians' dollars. And to be given to a man like this to do, supposed anti-racism training is just unfathomable. It's I'm flabbergasted by it, as are many Canadians. And so more recently, we found out that Laith Marouf was ordered to pay the money back, of course, but actually, more than 8 months have passed and not a single dime has been returned. And the Canadian government doesn't seem to have any motivation to go after him and to make sure that that's the case. And I think that's really alarming, to know that Canadian dollars, went toward this individual and that the government's not taking responsibility to reclaim that.
Rachel, you blasted our country's public broadcaster, the CBC, in calling them out for spreading dangerous, quote, misinformation during the Israel-Hamas war. Can you explain?
I did, Hal. And the reason for this is because the CBC is a public broadcaster. And so it's the responsibility of the Heritage Committee to hold it to account. At the end of the day, the CBC receives $1.4 billion from Canadian taxpayers. And so we expect them to report news that is accurate, news that is fair, news that is fact-based. And what ended up happening was it came to my attention that the CBC actually instructed its journalists to refrain from calling Hamas terrorists. Now, Hamas has been referred to as a terrorist organization officially by the government of Canada since 2002, so for more than 20 years. So for the CBC to make this decision, I thought was actually, incredibly alarming and actually dangerous. But further to that, you'll recall that there was an attack on a hospital in Gaza, and the CBC reported that it was Israel that attacked the hospital and that hundreds of civilians died. And they did this because they received their information directly from Hamas. And so really functioning as a mouthpiece for this terrorist organization. Now, of course, it came to light very quickly after that actually Israel wasn't responsible, and actually it wasn't the hospital that was hit, it was actually the parking lot. And so even despite these facts coming to light, the CBC refused to do a redaction, and they refused to apologize for misleading Canadians. This is dangerous because what we saw was an incredible uptake in anti-Semitic behavior and rhetoric, and ultimately hatred towards the Jewish population within Canada, therefore putting them in danger. These are the types of things that result when a news agency, and especially a public broadcaster, doesn't take the time to get it right. And so it's incredibly alarming, actually, that the CBC did this and that they're refusing to take responsibility.
That's something we always preach here at Bridge City News as well. We'd rather be correct than first. Some news organizations are like, let's get it out there. Do we know for sure? Don't worry about it. We'll retract later if we have to. And I'm like, no, that's a dangerous policy for any news organization. Rachel, before we let you go, what are your thoughts on the UCP looking into potentially pulling out of the Canada Pension Plan and creating our very own Alberta Pension Plan, which would apparently put more money into our seniors' pockets? Now, Premier Daniel Smith says more studying has to be done and a referendum will be held on the subject first. But what are your thoughts of pulling out of the CPP?
Well, I certainly appreciate that Ms. Smith is taking the time to listen to Albertans and, trying to do as many town halls as possible and get people to weigh in on this decision. At the end of the day, the reason why she's put in this position where this decision is even coming up is because the Prime Minister has actually divided our country. He's pitted one region against another, one sector against another, one way of life against another. And so as a result, Albertans are feeling incredibly misunderstood and ill-represented. Our energy sector has been under attack for an entire 8 years while Prime Minister Trudeau has been, in power. Further to that, our farmers have been scapegoated on multiple fronts and not given the support that they need. Further to that, just our Western way of thinking and our work ethic has not been appreciated for what it is. And so as a result, Canadians are hurting. Seniors are hurting. And so, we're in this place where there's this financial crisis that has hit so many homes in the province of Alberta. And where people are really wondering whether or not they have a voice in, Canada's Confederation, and what our future is to be. And so, unfortunately, it's due to Justin Trudeau's policies and his desire to pit region against region that we're in this position to begin with. So, I think it can be assured that under a Conservative government, we wouldn't actually be having this discussion because I think we'd be unified as a country from coast to coast, and people would be empowered to work within strong sectors of their choosing. And to bring home powerful paychecks. And so Canada would be in a much better place altogether.
So do you think we should pull out, though? Do you think we should pull out of the CPP? Go our own with an APP?
Yeah, it's ultimately up to the Albertan people to decide. They're going to be the ones to make that decision.
Lethbridge Conservative MP and Shadow Minister for Canadian Heritage, Rachel Thomas, thanks so much for your time today.
Thanks, Hal. Great to be with you.
As we all know, farmers and ranchers are vital to the health of the Canadian economy. But every year, they take a risk with weather conditions and global market changes. Joining us from Lethbridge is Ken Coles. He's the Executive Director of Farming Smarter. Ken, welcome back to Bridge City News. Always great to have you on.
Yeah, thanks to have me. How are you doing?
Doing great over here. Now, first of all, for those that don't know about you or Farming Smarter, can you just share a little bit about what Farming Smarter does as an organization and how you provide help to the ag industry, which is such a big part of Southern Alberta?
You betcha. Well, we like to consider ourselves an innovation hub, and we're focused in on Southern Alberta. So we're a regional group, kind of south of Highway 1 is our main area of interest and efforts. And as an innovation hub, we like to be able to support farmers in their developments of new ideas, new approaches, new farming practices, new crops, new technologies, but to provide it a little bit of science-based information. So we have a testing program, an agronomy research program where we'll do small plot trials in various different means and partnered with different people, experts from across the country. We'll then scale it up to our field tested program, where sort of the best things that we've learned, we'll do on-farm trials and make sure that we tweak and adapt the practices and processes so they make sense to farmers. And then, we try to share everything that we do between our knowledge network and that kind of extension effort. So it's making sure that we're sharing the knowledge and information that we have, but we're also hearing and getting feedback from farmers, from agronomists, from industry. So kind of bring the folks together and try to solve some problems and address some opportunities that are going on. There's a fourth program that we do have, and we work with sort of emerging companies in our commercial innovation. So we help test out products or practices in this area so that they can be connected with what matters to farmers.
Now, the federal Conservatives put forth a private members bill, C-234. It's also known as the Farm Heating Bill. And it's been getting a lot of attention recently because basically if this bill passes, it would exempt farmers from paying the carbon tax on propane and natural gas used to heat barns and dry grain. So the Liberals are saying no to this, and some are upset, and farmers really, including here in southern Alberta. Ken, what kind of impacts are we talking about here if farmers were to be exempt on the carbon tax?
Yeah. Well, it's certainly a really delicate and interesting situation that we're in, and it's a global thing. Climate change efforts are sort of top of mind in many governments, and lots of sort of political will and agenda towards that, and that influences everything, even including food production. So on the side challenge to that is that we're seeing this really tremendous inflation run right now. So everything is super expensive, cost of food. So now we've almost got these competing priorities. How do we get inflation and cost of living down, and at the same time, innovate and be good in the agricultural sector? So I think they're kind of conflicting interests, and I think that there's been some political moves on our provincial government as we're kind of getting closer to elections and leadership issues. So certainly that move on the eastern coast to sort of remove the carbon tax on heating oil for homes has kind of elevated that challenge. And I think when the agricultural bill is coming in now, seen as it's more of a conservative or Western Canadian type effort, now it's like, okay, are we going to punch all kinds of holes into our national climate strategy?
So do you feel that, because you said that that climate change appears to be on the top of government priorities, do you feel that federal and provincial governments don't have their priorities in order?
I think that there's a difference in opinions. It's no surprise to see that our conservative provincial government are sort of going to bats against the federal government in many different ways, and this is another example of that. I think I'm not a politician, but it's pretty obvious. I was actually in Ottawa last week and met with some senators, met with some MPs, and there was lots of discussion around that subject. But it's definitely a little bit trickier than sort of perceived in the media.
And what kind of feedback are you getting on the farm heating bill from southern Alberta farmers?
Well, I think farmers in general in Western Canada are, I think, in favor of not being taxed for a lot of their efforts. And then, the bill doesn't cover everything. I mean, even here in Southern Alberta, the pumping costs for irrigation, there's a huge amount of carbon tax that goes on that. So in the end, everything gets pushed back down to the consumers. And that's why we're starting to see compounding effects and higher costs of food. So it's a challenging situation. Agriculture, wants to be seen as a solution to climate change, but at the same time, how do we do it in a way that doesn't compromise, something that's important to everybody, and that's the cost of food?
We had some pretty dry conditions here in southern Alberta this year, and that typically results in below average crops. Do you have any stats on how we performed this year?
I don't have any hard stats for you, but it was a pretty hard drought here in southern Alberta. I think surprisingly, we did get sort of rain at right times that allowed us to get a crop. It wasn't a complete crop failure, but in the dryland area, obviously yields were depressed quite significantly. Irrigation held pretty strong, and we actually had a nice hot summer, so lots of heat units and crops performed quite well. So the problem is, though, now our reservoirs are empty, and it's becoming a challenging situation. So we're going to need to see lots of snowfall in the mountains and hopefully some rains and snow over the winter.
And on the subject of dry conditions, how would growing hemp perform in our region, especially with these dry conditions? Like if it grows well here, that could really take off as hemp has such a plethora of uses. What have you heard?
Yeah, well, hemp is certainly an interesting crop, and it's a novel crop, one that I'm interested in seeing develop over, the next couple of decades. I was just at the Canadian Hemp Trade Alliance meeting in Edmonton last week. Unfortunately, the industry is a bit on a lull right now, and it goes in sort of bursts of excitement, and people get into the industry, and then you get an oversupply. So that industry is still developing. It's not necessarily a fantastic option as a drought mitigation tool, but it does have a really good carbon sequestration benefit that I think is something we need to consider more. As far as the research is concerned that we've done in hemp over the last number of years, most of it's been under irrigation. And just because it's such a high value crop, or it should be a high value crop if the markets would develop appropriately.
So are there any specialty crops that did really well this past year?
Well, I think it's hard to pinpoint whether one crop did better. I mean, there are crops that have a little bit more drought tolerance than others. The heat was actually a bit of a factor on some of the flowering crops. So we have cool season crops like canola, but that can be a challenge. But the stuff that we have in rotations like the legumes and the peas and that sort of stuff has done pretty well. But I think probably what's the bigger factor is that our farming systems are dealing better with drought now. So we've got a better adoption of zero tillage. We've got good cover of soil and good rotations that mix up, crops that have deep roots and shallow roots. And overall, I think, all farmers would say that if we had this level of drought 20 or 30 years ago, that it would have been catastrophic. So I think it is a testament to the practices and the farming techniques that farmers are using today.
And every so often we hear the news of the number of family farm operations declining. Is that statistically true? Is the number dropping? And if so, what's causing it?
Well, from my understanding, I think the number of farms in general is decreasing. It's kind of an economies of scale. So larger, more specialized, diverse farms are succeeding. It doesn't mean that they're not still family farms. They're just bigger family farms. So I think that's a natural progression that we're seeing within the industry that's been going on for a number of years.
Are we seeing that maybe these smaller family farms being acquired by corporations or larger family farms or mergers of any sorts?
Well, it's usually neighbors that are picking up land, or sometimes people are retiring. They don't have kids that are going into farming. There's certainly, it's difficult to have a profitable farm unless you have an adequate land base, and sometimes those smaller farms just can't cut it unless they've got some value-added business component to it. So it's one of those things that it's kind of the nature of the beast of the industry, and I think that's just the way she's going.
And farming has become a very high-tech business these days. Is there a measurable difference in success rates when you compare farmers who are staying up to date with technology as compared to those who just stay with the traditional older methods?
Yeah, I think that's actually an interesting question, and there's been a lot of attention and focus on technology as sort of the next big thing in agriculture. Being involved in this field, I've seen a lot of high-tech approaches not work well, and I think that if you don't marry the agronomy to the technology, then a lot of them are failing. So I think that's actually a challenge within our industry right now, is that we might be a little too focused on technology and not looking at what actually matters on farms, because the level of effort that it requires to incorporate news, especially along the big data side of things, it takes a lot of time. It takes a lot of skill. And we've got so many bottlenecks in agriculture. So logistics sometimes will get in the way. I think that there's definitely, an appetite for it, but there's also farmers that are sort of watching and, waiting to see if there's truly value before they jump in.
And then what would you say to farmers watching who are old school? What do they need to change to become more profitable or sustainable?
Well, yeah, on the flip side, I do think that you always have to have an innovation mindset and innovation culture on your farm. It's just how you choose to evaluate it and when to adopt. And that's always a tricky thing. But so I would always keep an open mind, and I would never, I'd always encourage people, not to be afraid of failure in that sense, because sometimes in doing the exercise, trying things out, you actually learn something that you weren't even expecting to. So, I honestly do believe that it's worth putting some focused energy into that area and, look at ways at improving the resilience of your cropping systems. And always looking for ways to add value to your business as well. And there's lots of ways that can be done. It can be done through different crops, or it can be done through partnerships and so on.
And to those farmers who have invested in more advanced technology, how can they adapt older methods into their modern ways of farming?
Well, I think that's exactly the trick, right? And then the idea of innovation is that it's something new and something flashy, but sometimes it's about using an old idea and just applying it in a different way. So I think that again comes down to our sort of cultural approach and our perspective on innovation. So it's not always shiny. Sometimes it's simple, elegant solutions that are the most easily adoptable.
Now, Ken, we are seeing prices increase on both hogs and cattle. Is it the feed that is affecting these prices?
Well, feed plays a factor, but it really comes down to the market demand, and that can be a global impact. So we don't always know why things happen the way they happen.
Ken Coles is the Executive Director of Farming Smarter. Ken, thank you so much for being with us today.
Thanks for having me.
I'm Naveen Day. On behalf of all of us here at Bridge City News, thanks for watching.